In August of 2009, a woman named Shayla Wiggins was hiking alone in Gallatin National Forest in Montana when she rounded a bend in the trail and came face to face with a black bear. Not a grizzly, a black bear. The encounter lasted less than a minute. The bear killed her. Wildlife investigators who examined the scene found no evidence that the animal had been surprised. No evidence it was protecting food. No cubs in the area. What they found was consistent with a predatory attack, meaning the bear had not been defending anything. It had been hunting. Wiggins was 70 years old, alone on a trail she had walked before, in a part of the country where black bears are common and where the cultural assumption about which bear species is the dangerous one was so thoroughly embedded in the regional consciousness that even experienced outdoors people rarely spent much time thinking critically about the animal they were most likely to encounter. The incident received regional coverage. It prompted the standard statements about bear encounters being extremely rare and the importance of carrying bear spray regardless of species. What it did not prompt, in any public forum that reached a meaningful audience, was a genuine examination of the statistical pattern that makes that attack not anomalous, but representative of something important, something that runs directly counter to one of the most widely held beliefs in North American outdoor culture. The belief that grizzly bears are the bear you need to worry about. The belief that black bears are the smaller, more timid, less dangerous species that generally runs from humans and that the fear people feel around them is disproportionate to the actual risk they represent. That belief is not entirely wrong. It is also not entirely right. And in one specific situation, a situation that is common, that is increasing in frequency as human populations expand into bear habitat, and that catches people by surprise because it contradicts everything they have been told, black bears are statistically more dangerous than grizzlies. Not in every context. Not as a blanket statement about which species is more aggressive or more powerful, but in the specific context that wildlife researchers have been documenting with increasing clarity for 4 decades, and that the general outdoor public remains almost entirely unaware of. The numbers tell a story that is the opposite of the conventional wisdom, and understanding that story could save your life. If you have spent any time outdoors in North America, you have almost certainly been exposed to the standard framework for thinking about bear encounters. It goes like this. Grizzly bears are aggressive, territorial, and dangerous. Black bears are shy, non-confrontational, and much less likely to cause serious harm. If you encounter a grizzly, especially a mother with cubs, you may need to play dead, because fighting back will escalate the situation. If you encounter a black bear, you should make yourself large and loud, because black bears are not truly dangerous predators in the way grizzlies are, and aggressive behavior on your part will deter them. This framework is taught in outdoor education courses, printed in trail guides, repeated in ranger station orientation talks, and embedded in wildlife agency communications, with a consistency that gives it the authority of established fact. Parts of it are accurate. Grizzly bears in certain situations, specifically surprise encounters at close range, encounters involving mothers with cubs, and encounters near food sources or cached kills, do behave in ways that make playing dead an appropriate and evidence-supported response. The grizzly's defensive aggression in those contexts is real and has been responsible for a significant number of serious human injuries and deaths throughout the documented history of human-bear interaction in North America. The framework is not fabricated. It reflects genuine behavioral differences between the two species that have real consequences for how humans should respond in specific encounter contexts. But the framework is incomplete in a way that has been producing a dangerous gap in public understanding. And the gap is this. When it comes to predatory attacks, the attacks in which a bear is not defending territory, not defending cubs, not responding to a surprise encounter, but actively targeting a human as prey, The species responsible for the majority of fatal attacks in North America is not the grizzly, it is the black bear. And the primary reason for that is not that black bears are more aggressive or more dangerous per individual animal. It is that black bears are vastly more numerous, that they occupy far more habitat that directly overlaps with human activity, and that the behavioral profile of a predatory black bear attack is one that most people are completely unprepared to recognize or respond to correctly. Subscribe if you are here for the version of wildlife information that takes the evidence seriously, because what follows requires sustained attention, and it matters. The population differential between the two species is the foundation of the entire statistical picture, and it deserves to be stated plainly. There are approximately 900,000 black bears in North America. That number includes populations across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, from the swamps of Florida and Louisiana, through the forests of the Appalachians and the Great Lakes region, across the Rockies and the Pacific Ranges, up into the boreal forests of Canada and Alaska. Black bears are the most abundant bear species in the world. They are found in 41 of the 50 American states, at some level of population presence, in every Canadian province and territory, and in isolated populations in northern Mexico. They live in suburban greenbelts in New Jersey and New Hampshire. They den within the municipal boundaries of cities in the Appalachians. They raid dumpsters in resort towns in Colorado and California and North Carolina on a schedule so predictable that local residents plan their garbage disposal habits around it. They are, in the most literal ecological sense, everywhere that humans are in the forested eastern and western portions of the continent. The grizzly bear population in the lower 48 United States is approximately 1,800 to 2,000 animals, concentrated in a handful of ecosystems centered on Yellowstone National Park and the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem in Montana. Add the grizzly population of Alaska, which is substantially larger at approximately 30,000 animals, and the Canadian population of roughly 25,000, and you get a continental total somewhere in the range of 55,000 to 60,000 grizzlies. That is a real number. But it is a number that is dwarfed by the black bear population by a factor of more than 15 to 1. And in the conterminous United States, where the majority of the human population lives, and where the vast majority of human-bear encounters occur, the ratio is not 15 to 1. It is more like 400 to 1. This population differential matters enormously for how you interpret any comparative statistics about human attacks by the two species. Raw attack numbers cannot be compared between grizzlies and black bears without accounting for the enormous difference in how many animals of each species exist, how much territory they occupy, and how much overlap that territory has with human activity. A species with 400 times fewer animals producing a similar or larger number of serious attacks would represent a dramatically higher per-animal attack rate. A species with 400 times more animals producing similar attack numbers would represent a dramatically lower per-animal attack rate, even if the absolute numbers made it look equally or more dangerous. When wildlife researchers do the work of controlling for population size, range overlap with humans, and the number of human hours spent in habitat for each species, the per-encounter attack rates tell a more nuanced story than either the raw numbers or the conventional wisdom suggest. The key study in the North American literature on this question was published in 2011 by Stephen Herrero, James Higgins, and colleagues in the Journal of Wildlife Management. Herrero is the most cited authority on bear attacks in the academic literature, the author of Bear Attacks, Their Causes and Avoidance, which has been the standard reference text for wildlife professionals and serious outdoors people since its first publication in 1985. The 2011 paper examined fatal bear attacks across North America from 1900 to 2009, a period of over a century, and analyzed them by species, by context, and by the behavioral type of attack involved. The findings on predatory attacks, specifically attacks in which a bear was identified as hunting the victim rather than responding defensively to a perceived threat, were the findings that most directly challenged the conventional wisdom and that have been most consistently underreported in the popular science and outdoor media coverage that followed. Of the fatal predatory attacks documented in the study period, attacks in which the bear was not surprised, not defending cubs, not defending food, but actively hunting a human as prey, the species responsible was disproportionately the black bear. In the subset of attacks that fit the predatory behavioral profile most clearly, black bears were responsible for the majority. Not because individual black bears are more dangerous predators than individual grizzlies. Any wildlife biologist will tell you that a grizzly bear, size for size, is a more formidable animal than a black bear. More powerful, more aggressive, with the musculature and the personality that its evolutionary history on open terrain has built. But the situation that produces a predatory attack, as opposed to a defensive attack, is a situation in which the raw power of the attacking animal matters less than the behavioral and ecological circumstances that led to the attack in the first place. And those circumstances favor black bears in the predatory attack context in ways that the conventional wisdom about which species is dangerous has never adequately addressed. Understanding why requires understanding the behavioral difference between defensive and predatory bear attacks, because the two types are not only caused by different circumstances, but require completely different responses from the victim. And confusing them is one of the most dangerous mistakes a person can make in a bear encounter. Defensive attacks are exactly what the name suggests. The bear is defending something, its personal space, its cubs, its food cache, its life. The most common defensive attack scenario involving grizzly bears is the surprise encounter at close range. A hiker on a trail in dense vegetation, a stream corridor in bear country, a path through high brush, rounds a bend and finds themselves within 20 or 30 feet of a grizzly that has not detected them. The bear reacts to the sudden close presence of a large animal with a defensive charge. This is not predation. This is the expression of the same fight or flight response that all mammals have, expressed in an animal that is large enough and confident enough that flight is not its first option. The bear is not trying to eat the person. It is trying to eliminate what it perceives as a threat to itself. In this context, playing dead by lying face down with hands locked behind the neck and elbows protecting the face does work, and works reliably enough to be the standard guidance because it signals to the bear that the threat has been neutralized. A bear that is defending itself from a perceived threat is not motivated to continue attacking an animal that has stopped moving and stopped threatening. The attack is over when the threat is over. Defensive attacks involving black bears are less common and generally less severe than grizzly defensive attacks, primarily because black bears' evolutionary history has taken them in a different behavioral direction. Where grizzlies evolved on open terrain and developed the aggressive territorial behavior that standing and fighting rewards when you are large enough to win, black bears evolved in forested environments where retreat was always an option. Their default response to threat is to climb a tree or run rather than to stand and fight. The result is a species with a lower threshold for retreat and a correspondingly lower rate of defensive aggression in encounter situations. This is the behavioral basis for the conventional wisdom about black bears being less dangerous, and it is accurate as far as it goes. Black bears are less likely to respond to a surprise encounter or a perceived territorial threat with the explosive defensive aggression that grizzlies exhibit. But predatory attacks are the reverse image of defensive attacks in almost every relevant dimension. A predatory attack is one in which the bear is not reacting to a threat. It is initiating contact because it has assessed the potential victim as prey. It is not scared. It is not angry. It is hunting. and the guidance that works for defensive attacks. Playing dead, making yourself small, speaking calmly to a grizzly that is huffing and bluff-charging is not only wrong for a predatory attack, it is potentially fatal. A person who plays dead for a predatory bear has done exactly what the bear needs them to do. They have become a motionless, non-threatening food item. The bear does not need any additional encouragement. Playing dead in a predatory attack context has been documented in the incident record as a decision that converted what might have been a survivable encounter into a fatal one. The guidance for predatory attacks from both species is the same. Fight back with everything available. Eyes, nose, anything within reach. Do not stop. Do not play dead. Do not attempt to retreat unless you can create significant distance and access shelter. Fight. This guidance is supported by the documented outcomes of predatory attack incidents across the historical record in ways that are not ambiguous. People who fought back against predatory bears, including people who were physically overmatched by the animal involved, survived at higher rates than people who attempted to play dead or disengage without fighting. The fighting response does not guarantee survival. Nothing does, in the context of a large bear in a predatory state. But it represents the response with the best documented outcomes and the strongest biological logic. Because a bear in a predatory state is engaged in a cost-benefit calculation, not a defensive response. And every unit of resistance the prey offers raises the cost side of that calculation. The problem is that people are not, in general, good at distinguishing predatory from defensive bear behavior in real time. The encounter happens fast. The bear is a large, alarming presence. The person's threat response activates, and the cognitive resources available for accurate behavioral assessment of the attacker are reduced by the neurological reality of acute fear. People default to what they have been told, and what the majority of people have been told about bear attacks in North America is a framework built around the grizzly defensive attack scenario. The playing dead guidance has received so much coverage, been repeated so many times, been associated so strongly with the idea of bear attack survival, that it has become the default response that people attempt even when it is profoundly wrong for the situation they are in. The black bear predatory attack adds a specific additional layer of confusion to this picture that makes it particularly hazardous. Black bears that are initiating predatory attacks on humans often do not display the behavioral signals that people associate with dangerous bear behavior. They do not huff, they do not jaw pop, they do not bluff charge, they do not do the head-lowering, sideways-looking, ground-slapping threat display that grizzlies frequently exhibit before a defensive attack. They approach quietly, persistently, and with what observers have described as a calm, focused quality that is deeply unnerving, precisely because it lacks the theatrical elements that people have been trained to watch for. A predatory black bear may walk toward a person slowly and steadily, stop when the person makes noise, then resume walking toward them when the noise stops. It may circle. It may watch from a distance for a period before approaching. The behavioral signature is not aggression, it is assessment. The bear is looking at the potential prey item and deciding whether the attack makes sense. It has already decided this is a potential food source. It is now working out the logistics. This approach behavior is one of the most important warning signs in the entire incident record, and it is one of the least recognized by people who encounter it because it does not look like what they expect a dangerous bear encounter to look like. People who have described early stages of black bear predatory attacks report feeling confused rather than immediately alarmed. The bear does not seem aggressive. It seems curious. It keeps coming closer. It does not run away when they yell. It stops when they yell, then continues approaching when they stop. The confusion is itself a danger, because the appropriate response to persistent approach behavior by any bear that does not respond to deterrence is not to wait and see what happens. It is to treat the encounter as predatory and respond accordingly, immediately and aggressively. The geographic distribution of black bears relative to where people actually spend their time outdoors is the second major factor in the statistical picture. The American East is home to a substantial and growing black bear population. The Appalachian Range from Georgia to Maine holds bears. New Jersey, despite being the most densely populated state in the country, has a black bear population estimated at between 3,000 and 3,500 animals. Pennsylvania has one of the largest black bear populations in the East and the largest black bear hunting harvest in the United States in many years. New York, Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, the Great Lakes states all have substantial black bear populations that have grown significantly in the past 30 years, as hunting regulations have changed, as forested habitat has recovered from the agricultural conversion of the 19th and early 20th centuries, and as bears have demonstrated an extraordinary capacity to adapt to human-dominated landscapes. There are no grizzly bears in any of these places. There are no grizzly bears east of the Rocky Mountain Front Range in the lower 48 states, with negligible exceptions that do not affect the practical risk landscape for people recreating east of the Continental Divide. The entire eastern half of the contiguous United States, where roughly 60% of the American population lives, and where millions of people hike, camp, hunt, and recreate in forested terrain every year, has zero grizzly bear presence. It has a very substantial black bear presence that has been expanding steadily. The risk landscape in the East is entirely a black bear risk landscape, and it is experienced by a population that has been culturally trained to think of grizzlies as the dangerous bear, and black bears as the manageable one. The Appalachian Trail runs over 2,100 miles through territory that is either confirmed black bear habitat or has documented black bear presence along its entire length. The trail attracts somewhere between 3 and 4 million visitors per year, including several thousand thru-hikers who spend months in the corridor. Bear encounters on the Appalachian Trail are common enough that they are not reported individually, unless they result in injury. The encounters that result in injury are still rare in absolute terms. The encounters that have resulted in predatory behavior, persistent following, camp intrusion in the presence of people, food theft escalating to contact with the person rather than the food, have been increasing as the bear population has grown and as bears in areas of heavy trail traffic have become habituated to human presence and human food sources. The food conditioning and habituation dynamic in black bears is where the most important and least discussed risk multiplication occurs. Black bears are extraordinarily intelligent, extraordinarily good at learning from experience, and extraordinarily motivated to acquire high-calorie food sources. A black bear that has successfully obtained human food, whether from a campsite cooler, a dumpster, a bird feeder, or a backpacker's improperly hung food bag, has received one of the most powerful behavioral reinforcements available in the animal learning literature: high-calorie food, obtained at low cost and low risk. The bear remembers where it got the food, how it got the food, and what the circumstances were that made it possible. It returns. It refines its technique. It becomes bolder with each successful acquisition, because each success is further evidence that humans and human spaces do not represent a threat commensurate with the reward available. This is the progression that wildlife managers have documented with depressing consistency in areas where human food sources have been inadequately secured over time. A bear that begins by raiding unattended campsites at night becomes a bear that raids occupied campsites at night. A bear that raids occupied campsites at night becomes a bear that approaches campers to take food during the day. A bear that approaches campers during the day becomes a bear that will bluff charge or make contact to drive people away from food it has decided belongs to it. Each step in this progression is driven by reinforcement of a simple behavioral logic: approach humans, get food. The cost side of the equation, the risk the bear takes, is not being updated by negative experience, because in most cases, the humans involved are not delivering negative experience. They are backing away, giving up the food, and leaving the encounter shaken but unharmed, which from the bear's perspective is a successful acquisition with no meaningful cost. The terminal expression of this progression, the food-conditioned black bear that has lost all wariness of humans and is willing to use physical intimidation and then physical force to access food or food-associated spaces, is the context that most closely approximates predatory behavior without being purely predatory. These bears are not initially targeting humans as prey. They are targeting human spaces as food sources, and treating the humans in those spaces as obstacles rather than threats. But the behavioral distance between that state and a predatory attack is shorter than most people realize, and the incident record includes documented cases in which bears that began in the food-conditioned category crossed into predatory behavior as their boldness with humans increased and their food motivation intensified. The case of the 2003 attack at Liard Hot Springs Provincial Park in British Columbia, where a food-conditioned black bear killed 2 people in a campground, represents one of the most extensively analyzed examples of this progression in the North American literature. The bear had been repeatedly sighted in the campground in the weeks before the attack. Warnings had been posted. Campers had been reporting its brazen approach behavior. The warnings did not produce the behavioral changes in either the bear or the campers that would have interrupted the progression. The remote wilderness setting, which is the mental image most people carry when they think about dangerous bear encounters, is not actually where most fatal black bear attacks occur. This is one of the most consistently documented and consistently surprising findings in the attack literature, and it runs directly counter to the mental model that outdoor recreationists carry. Fatal black bear attacks are not concentrated in the deep wilderness, where people rarely go. They occur in a wide range of settings, including areas of high human visitation, campgrounds, suburban greenbelts, rural residential areas on the edge of forested terrain, and logging or forestry work sites. The worksite context is particularly significant and has been underreported in general interest coverage because it involves populations that are not part of the recreational outdoor culture and whose risk exposure rarely drives media narratives about wildlife encounters. Forestry workers, pipeline workers, mining camp personnel, and others who work in remote or semi-remote terrain in black bear country in Canada and the northern United States represent a population with high occupational exposure to black bears that has produced a disproportionate share of the serious attack incidents in the Canadian provinces over the past 40 years. These workers are in bear habitat for extended periods, often alone or in small groups, doing work that masks their auditory signature, moving through terrain at speeds and in ways that can trigger the approach and assessment behavior of a predatory bear, and in many cases not carrying or not being trained to use the bear deterrence that would alter the encounter outcome. The attacks in this population cluster in the remote worksite context, but they do not show the behavioral profile of defensive attacks provoked by surprise encounters. They show the behavioral profile of predatory attacks: persistent following, assessment behavior before contact, victims who were alone or separated from the group, attack patterns that focus on the head and neck in ways consistent with a predatory rather than a defensive strike sequence. The head and neck targeting pattern in predatory black bear attacks is something that forensic wildlife investigators have documented consistently across multiple decades of attack analysis, and that has significant implications for survival strategy. Defensive bear attacks from both grizzlies and black bears tend to produce injuries that are distributed across the body, reflecting the generalized nature of a defensive strike aimed at driving away a threat rather than incapacitating prey. The bear is hitting something it wants to move away from it. The strike pattern reflects that motivation. Predatory attacks, particularly in their lethal expressions, show a different injury distribution, concentrated on the head and neck in a pattern that is anatomically consistent with the killing strikes that black bears use on their natural prey. Deer, beavers, moose calves, and other prey killed by black bears are typically killed by bites to the back of the skull or the neck, applied with the bear's full jaw force. The injury patterns in human fatalities from predatory black bear attacks show similar concentrations, and this forensic signature has been one of the important analytical tools that wildlife investigators use to classify attacks as predatory rather than defensive when the behavioral record is incomplete. The survival implications of this targeting pattern are sobering. Protecting the head and neck during a predatory bear attack requires active, aggressive physical response. It requires the person to be moving, fighting, and making the attack as costly as possible for the bear. It is incompatible with lying still. It is incompatible with the passive submission response. The bear is attempting to execute a killing strike on a specific anatomical target. The only effective counter is to make that target unavailable and to make the cost of attempting to acquire it higher than the bear's calculation supports. This is why every wildlife authority who has examined the predatory attack literature concludes, without exception, that the correct response to a predatory black bear attack is to fight back, immediately, aggressively, and without stopping. The bear spray evidence is important here and deserves specific treatment because it represents the most reliable and consistently documented risk reduction tool available to people who spend time in black bear country, and because its adoption rate in the general outdoor population remains far lower than the evidence warrants. Bear spray, a concentrated capsaicin aerosol designed for deterring bear attacks, has a documented deterrence success rate that is extraordinary by wildlife encounter standards. Studies examining bear spray deployment in defensive attack contexts have found success rates in the range of 90 to 98% in stopping or deterring attacks. The evidence base for bear spray exceeds the evidence base for firearms in bear encounter defense, not because firearms cannot be effective, but because the deterrence effect of bear spray does not require the user to be in the physically composed state necessary to accurately discharge a firearm at a charging bear at close range, a state that is physiologically difficult to achieve when the autonomic nervous system is doing what it does in the presence of a charging large carnivore. The important qualification for the bear spray evidence is that the majority of the documented success cases involve defensive attacks, the context in which grizzly defensive encounters are most common. The evidence base for bear spray effectiveness, specifically against predatory black bear attacks, is smaller, because predatory attacks are less common in absolute terms. The evidence that does exist is consistent with effectiveness in the predatory context as well, because the capsaicin compound produces a severe inflammatory response in the bear's eyes and nasal passages that interrupts the attack regardless of whether it was motivated by defense or predation. But the mechanism is different. In a defensive attack context, the spray stops the attack by eliminating the threat signal that triggered it. The bear retreats, because the deterrent has removed it from an approach path that was not motivated by hunger. In a predatory context, the spray stops the attack by making continuation of the attack physically impossible for the bear in the immediate term. The bear retreats because it cannot see and cannot breathe. The predatory motivation does not disappear, which is why following up a successful bear spray deployment against a predatory bear by immediately leaving the area is critical rather than optional. The carrying rate of bear spray among general outdoor users in black bear country in the American East, which again is the region with no grizzlies and a large and growing black bear population, is low. Surveys of Appalachian Trail users have found that a minority of hikers carry bear spray, and that of those who carry it, a fraction have practiced accessing and deploying it under simulated time pressure. The cognitive load of accessing and deploying a bear spray canister in the first 3 to 5 seconds of a bear encounter approaches the limits of what people can reliably execute without specific practice. The tool is highly effective. The human factors associated with its deployment are not self-correcting without deliberate training. The gap between the evidence for the tool's effectiveness and the practical training investment that makes it usable in the real encounter context is one of the most directly addressable risk reduction opportunities in the human black bear interface, and one of the least addressed by outdoor recreation culture and formal outdoor education. The nocturnal attack context is another dimension of the black bear predatory attack picture that the general outdoor public underappreciates, and that the incident record documents with specific clarity. Attacks at night, on sleeping or recently sleeping victims in tents or camping shelters, show a behavioral profile that is almost exclusively predatory rather than defensive. A bear does not stumble into a tent in the dark and react defensively. It approaches a tent in the dark because the tent represents a potential food source or prey item that it has assessed and decided to pursue. The nighttime camping attack is among the most terrifying of all bear encounter scenarios because it removes the visual cues that would allow early detection of approach behavior, because it catches the victim in a state of reduced alertness, and because the enclosed space of a tent constrains the victim's ability to create distance and deliver the aggressive response that the predatory attack context requires. The documented cases of nighttime tent attacks by black bears in North America are not numerous, but they are consistent in their behavioral profile and in the outcomes. The attacks that ended fatally almost all involved victims who were alone, who did not fight back effectively in the early stages of the attack, or who were in camps where food odors or improperly stored food had been present, and where the bear had likely been around the camp before the attack without detection. The attacks that ended with the victim surviving, including cases where injuries were serious, almost all involved some form of effective fighting response, either by the victim or by others in the camp who heard the attack and intervened, and in some cases by bear spray deployment. The pattern is consistent enough to constitute not just an anecdote collection, but a genuine evidence base for what works and what does not work in this specific encounter context. The children in camp context overlaps with the nocturnal attack picture in ways that should be specific and explicit in any serious treatment of this subject. Children sleeping in tents in black bear country represent a risk profile that differs from adult campers in ways that are directly relevant to the predatory attack mechanism. Children are smaller, they are quieter sleepers. They produce less of the behavioral deterrence that an alert adult camper creates by moving, talking, and otherwise signaling presence. A bear assessing a camp may calibrate its approach differently based on the noise signature it is receiving, and a tent occupied by a sleeping child produces a different noise signature than a tent occupied by alert adults. The specific vulnerability of children in camp settings in areas with active black bear populations is not a topic that outdoor recreation culture has addressed with anything approaching the directness that the evidence warrants. Family camping in black bear country is a common, wholesome, and generally safe activity. It is made meaningfully safer by specific practices, proper food storage, campsite selection away from travel corridors, maintaining a sound-emitting presence in camp, and having bear deterrence accessible at night that are widely recommended but inconsistently practiced. The population growth trajectory of black bears in North America and its implications for the risk landscape over the next 2 decades deserve examination, because the current period is not the steady state. Black bear populations in the United States have grown dramatically since the 1970s. driven by habitat recovery, changes in hunting regulations, and the bear's extraordinary adaptability to a wide range of environments, including human-modified ones. The current estimated population of 900,000 represents a substantial increase from the population of the 1970s, which was estimated at between 200,000 and 400,000 animals. The growth has not been uniform, but it has been widespread, and in the eastern United States, it has produced population densities in some areas that are historically unprecedented in the post-colonial period. Black bears have recolonized portions of their historical range in the mid-Atlantic and southeast, from which they had been absent for generations. They are expanding into suburban and exurban terrain in multiple regions, with a consistency that reflects both the growth of their population and the growth of the human development pattern that creates the interface habitat they are so effective at exploiting. More bears in more places that overlap with more humans means more encounters. More encounters means more opportunities for the subset of encounters that develop into attacks. The absolute risk to any individual person recreating in black bear country remains very low. The trend in the frequency of serious encounters is not moving in a direction that supports complacency, and the directional change in that trend is happening against a backdrop of widespread public understanding that is calibrated to historical risk levels rather than current ones. The management challenge that black bears present to wildlife agencies is structurally different from the challenge presented by grizzlies, and the difference has implications for how effectively the agencies can modulate the risk landscape through direct management action. Grizzly bear populations in the lower 48 states are small, intensively monitored, and concentrated in specific ecosystems where wildlife management infrastructure is robust. Problem individual grizzlies can be identified, tracked, and removed from the population with a degree of operational control that is simply not available for black bear management across the scale of the black bear's range. There are too many bears, too widely distributed, in too many jurisdictions, with too varied management approaches and too limited monitoring capacity for anything like the individual level management that is possible with grizzlies to be applied to the black bear population as a whole. The primary management lever that has historically regulated black bear populations, and in turn, the frequency of problem encounters, is regulated hunting. Hunting seasons in states and provinces with black bear populations reduce the population, maintain wariness of humans in bears that survive encounters with hunters, and remove from the population the older, bolder animals that are most likely to have developed the food conditioning and habituation profiles associated with problem behavior. The hunting as management argument is not popular in all quarters of the outdoor and conservation community, and the value judgments embedded in wildlife management by harvest are legitimate subjects of debate. But the empirical relationship between regulated black bear hunting and the frequency of serious human-bear conflict is not a matter of significant scientific dispute. Jurisdictions that maintain regulated hunting seasons in proportion to their black bear populations have lower rates of serious human-bear conflict than jurisdictions that do not, when controlling for other variables. The mechanism is not complicated. Hunting maintains the fear of humans in the bear population. The fear of humans is the behavioral governor that suppresses predatory and food conditioning behavior. Remove the fear, and you remove the governor. New Jersey is the most striking case study in this dynamic in the American East. The state's black bear population, concentrated in the northwestern counties, was managed for decades under a hunting moratorium that reflected public and legislative preferences about bear hunting. During the moratorium period, bear incidents, property damage, food conditioning reports, and close human encounters increased substantially, and at a rate that was not explained by population growth alone. The reinstatement of hunting seasons in the 2000s produced measurable reductions in incident rates in areas where hunting pressure was applied. The political pressure to restrict or eliminate the hunting season has continued, and the management response has oscillated accordingly. The bear population and the human conflict rate in New Jersey represent, in miniature, the same dynamic that is playing out at larger scales across the eastern United States as urban and suburban populations, with cultural preferences against hunting bear, increasingly make land use and wildlife management decisions in terrain that they share with a growing black bear population that they underestimate. The California comparison is worth making in this context because California has both the most studied mountain lion conflict with humans in the West and a black bear population story that runs parallel to it in instructive ways. The state's black bear population is estimated at between 30,000 and 40,000 animals and has grown substantially over the past 30 years. The bears are no longer confined to the Sierra Nevada and the North Coast ranges. They are present in the foothills surrounding the Central Valley, in the mountains behind Los Angeles and San Diego, and in the coastal ranges of the Central Coast. Human black bear conflict in California has grown proportionally with the population and with the expansion of the bear's range into human-dominated terrain. The food conditioning progression has been documented in communities throughout the Sierra Nevada foothill zone, where bears have learned to access residential areas with enough regularity that residents have adapted their behavior in ways that they have largely normalized, rather than identified as indicators of escalating bear boldness. The number of serious black bear incidents in California, defined as incidents involving physical contact with a human or a credible predatory approach, has increased over the past decade. The increase is in the direction the population and range expansion numbers would predict, and it is in the direction that the food conditioning and habituation dynamics would predict. What the bear safety community and the wildlife management community have not yet fully solved is the communication problem. The messaging about black bears has, for understandable historical and conservation-related reasons, been tilted toward reassurance. The bears are not dangerous. The encounters are almost never serious. Keep your food stored properly, and you will be fine. All of that is broadly true as a statistical description of the average encounter. It is calibrated to the average encounter in ways that poorly serve the people who find themselves in the non-average encounter. The encounter with a food-conditioned and habituated bear that has decided to approach rather than flee. The encounter that unfolds at night. The encounter with a young bear that is nutritionally stressed and has assessed a solo hiker as a manageable prey opportunity. The defensive approach messaging and the predatory approach messaging require completely different behavioral responses from the person in the encounter. A person who has been taught that black bears are not truly dangerous and that making noise and backing away slowly is the appropriate response to any black bear encounter is poorly served by that instruction when the bear they are facing is walking toward them slowly and persistently, and not responding to noise by fleeing. The persistent, non-responsive approach is the signal. It is the signal that the encounter has moved out of the category where the standard reassurance applies and into the category where the predatory response protocol applies. Recognizing that signal, in real time, in a situation that activates the full physiological expression of the fear response, requires having had the information about what the signal means in advance, having processed it clearly enough that it is accessible under stress, and having made a decision before the encounter about how you will respond if you see it. The information is available. It is in the research literature. It is in the serious wildlife encounter guides that draw on the research literature rather than on the cultural consensus about which bear is dangerous. It is not reliably in the standard outdoor recreation safety messaging that reaches the broad population of people who spend time in black bear country. The gap between what the evidence says and what the culture knows is the gap where the danger lives. Bears that have been involved in fatal attacks in the documented record when the records are examined with the analytical framework that distinguishes predatory from defensive motivation, show a clustering of characteristics that is not random. They are disproportionately male. They are disproportionately young adults, in the 1 to 3-year-old age range, an age at which bears have been driven from their mother's range but have not yet established territories and are nutritionally pressed. They are disproportionately animals in areas where human food has been available, either through poor storage practices at campsites and residences, or through dump and refuse sites that have historically served as attractants. They show disproportionately low wariness of humans relative to the baseline for their population, which is the behavioral signature of habituation, regardless of whether the habituation was acquired through food conditioning or through repeated non-negative encounters with humans in their travel corridors. The profile is specific and it is consistent, and it allows for something important. It is not entirely unpredictable. The most dangerous black bears are not randomly distributed through the population. They are produced by a set of ecological and demographic conditions that are identifiable in principle and that, in areas with sufficient monitoring capacity, can be identified in practice before a fatal encounter occurs. Young male bears dispersing from family ranges in late summer and fall, the period of hyperphagia, when bears are maximally motivated to acquire calories before hibernation, moving through terrain where human food has been improperly secured, in areas where the bear population's general wariness level has been eroded by years of insufficient negative reinforcement of approach behavior. This is the configuration that the incident record points to as the highest risk scenario. Not every bear in that configuration attacks a person. The vast majority do not. But the configuration is where the fatal attacks cluster with enough consistency to constitute a predictive framework, rather than a collection of unfortunate coincidences. The hyperphagia dimension deserves specific attention because the seasonal risk elevation it produces is not widely understood by the general outdoor public. Hyperphagia is the biological state that black bears enter in late summer and fall, driven by the hormonal changes associated with preparation for hibernation, in which their daily caloric intake requirement increases to as much as 20,000 calories, and their motivation to acquire food overrides behavioral inhibitions that would otherwise limit their approach to risky food sources. A bear in hyperphagia is not behaving the way it behaves in June. It is more persistent, more bold, more willing to approach human spaces, and more willing to overcome obstacles, including the obstacle of human presence, that would have deterred it earlier in the season. The late summer and fall period, roughly August through November, in most of the bear's range, is the period during which serious human-bear incidents are most